Israel expands its settlements in the West Bank. The Palestinians call the move a land grab. Can Israel's settlements be justified or are they illegal? Hello, I'm Anand, Naidoo, and this is The Heat. Just days after the ceasefire ended weeks of conflict between Israeli forces and Hamas fighters in Gaza, Israel announced plans to claim about 400 hectares of land in the West Bank. The move was widely denounced in the international community. Even Israel's staunch ally, the United States, called on the Israeli government to reverse the decision. An anti-settlement group says the Israeli government will use the 400 hectares site to build more homes for Jewish settlers. Roughly 500,000 Israelis already live in the occupied West Bank in East Jerusalem territory that was captured by Israel during the 1967 Middle East War. The Jewish settlements have become a major obstacle to resolving the conflict between the Israelis and Palestinians. Later in the show, we'll have a Palestinian perspective on all of this, but first we begin with two Israelis who have very different views on the settlements. Joining us from Tel Aviv is Paul Hirschson. He is a spokesperson for the Israeli Foreign Ministry, and also from Tel Aviv, we're joined by Gideon Levy. He's a columnist with the Israeli newspaper Haaretz. Gentlemen, thanks to both of you for joining us. Paul Hirschson, let me start with you. This land claim by the Israelis has, as we've just reported, been widely criticized around the world. The British Prime Minister David Cameron denounced it as, quote, utterly deplorable, and even the United States, a staunch ally of Israel, said this. The United States said, "We are deeply concerned about the declaration of a large area as state land to be used for expanded settlement building. We call on the government of Israel to reverse this decision." So what is the Israeli government's response to this criticism?
Well, you know, I think we have to look at what happened. There was zero annexation of any land. There were zero building permits applied for, and there were no building permits granted. There's no construction that has started, and certainly no construction that has ended. And all of this on a relatively small piece of land in an area that everybody, including the Palestinians, understands very well is going to be incorporated into Israel when we reach an agreement. So I think we need to keep a perspective on what's going on. We, the Israel and the Palestinians, are signed on agreements by which we are legally obliged to implement. And that includes that in that part of the West Bank which we administer, what's called Area C, about 2/3 of the West Bank, we're obliged to take care of law and order. That includes building regulations. We're talking about a relatively small piece of land over which there's been no property claims for 45 years now, and it was simply classified from a grey zone to state land.
Gideon Levy, what do you make of that? No property claims on this land that Israel took.
I'm really quite surprised to hear those explanations, because throughout decades, all the mega settlements of Israel, they all started with those bureaucratic explanations that there is no intention, that everything is legal, that everything is just temporary, that everything is agreed. This is obviously ridiculous. Any building, any house, any terrace, any acre which is confiscated in the occupied territories is a crime of war, is a violation of the international law. And it's very, very clear that within months there will be another Jewish city on some more stolen land of Palestinians. And I just ask myself, how can Israel really dare to claim that it has any kind of serious intentions about the two-state solution when it continues to build settlements everywhere and never stopped building settlements? Anyone who wants really to know the real, genuine intentions of Israel should check it by the settlement projects. The day that Israel is adding one building in the occupied territories is the day that everyone can understand that Israel has not the slightest intention to put an end to this occupation.
Paul Hirschson, very serious allegations there. Israel's committing a crime of war, a violation of international law, and has no intention of going through with a two-state solution.
Look, I'm not going to get into a slanging match with Gideon. Gideon is an Israeli citizen. As such, he's a partner of mine. His voice and all the other voices of Israel are what makes Israel such a beautiful dynamics country. The conversation that we hear, not only do we allow, but we encourage people to express their opinions. We hear fringe voices like Gideon's from the far right, from the far left, everything in between. These are all the notes that make up the quite spectacular jazz festival that is Israel. This is precisely the reason why people around the world are wanting to invest in Israel, because of who we are. So I'm not going to criticize him. Look, people are entitled to label things as they feel, to call it occupied land, to call it disputed land. I think it's important upon us, especially given what's gone on the last couple of months and what we're looking at in Syria and Iraq with ISIS and the horrors going on in this region right now. It's incumbent upon us to no longer allow the voices of those who want to pursue conflict to drive the agenda,
I'm not sure
and to allow those of us who are interested in conflict resolution.
Right, I'm not sure what ISIS has to do with what we're talking about right now. I mean, the allegation that was made was that Israel...
No, my point is...
Yeah, is that Israel is violating international law, and as Gideon Levy said, it is a crime of war that you're taking
My point is that my point is that we're allowing people who are pursuing conflict to drive the agenda rather than those of us who want to pursue conflict resolution to drive the agenda. I mean, by the Palestinians' own numbers, the entire settlement movement doesn't sit on more than 1.8% of the West Bank. We're either not particularly good at doing this, given our record, or the facts really are somewhere else. We're talking about a relatively small piece of land, a couple of 100 hectares, within the Etzion block itself, a small piece of land, which everybody understands, including the Palestinians. There's no dispute, will be incorporated into Israel when we reach an agreement.
Okay, Gideon Levy, let's get some clarity on this. The land that we're talking about here, was that land granted to the Palestinians for the creation of a Palestinian state, or is it, as the Israelis contend, disputed land? I mean, is the green line going to be the border of a new Palestinian state, or when the resolution was passed by the United Nations back in the late 40s, I mean, was that left to future negotiators?
Listen, the 67 borders are really the minimal compromise that any kind of Palestinian will be ever ready to compromise. What more does Israel want from them? Okay, two-thirds of the land are anyhow in Israel's hands. And now we'll start to negotiate about this small piece of land. Either Israel wants to have a viable Palestinian state next to her, which is the only guarantee for some kind of possibility of peace and security for Israel, or Israel wants to continue with those occupation games and claim that this should be negotiated and this should be negotiated. I mean, how far can Israel go, and when will Israel say, you know, after 48, after 67, after all those years, that's the point that we understand that the Palestinians are also equal human beings in this piece of land, and they deserve exactly the same rights as any Jewish citizens of Israel. This day seems to be fairer than ever.
Paul, you want to respond to that?
Well, I agree with most of what Gideon says, and it's government policy in Israel, amongst other things, to establish a Palestinian Arab state. So again, you know, there's little difference between government policy and what Gideon is saying over there. The difference, of course, is in the nuance and in the color that he's putting on it. He doesn't believe, and he's entitled to not believe, that the Israeli government is trying to move forward. We've recognized the Palestinians' right to national self-determination. We're still trying to ascertain whether the Palestinians and the Arab world at large really understand that we're here by right and not as an accident of fate. But be that as it may, I don't have major disagreements with Gideon.
Gideon Levy, you wrote in Haaretz recently that the Netanyahu government has determined, quote, that the settlements are punishment. From now on, that's official. Explain that to us.
Yeah, because when those 4,000 dunams were declared as lands belonging to the state lands, Israel officially declared that this is a reaction, a retaliation to the kidnap and murder of 3 young Israelis in the West Bank a couple of months ago. So Israel, the official Israel, Israel admitted that this is a retaliation, that settlements are a punishment. And I was very happy that the Netanyahu government was the first time honest enough to declare that this is a price tag policy, much worse, by the way, than the violent price tag policy of all kinds of settlers who burn mosques and damage cars, because this is on much bigger scale, this price tag policy. But it was another action of price tag policy, sure, and it is a punishment both for the Palestinians and for the Israelis.
Paul Hirschson, was this punishment for the murder of, kidnapping and murder of the 3 young Israelis?
No, not at all, and I think Gideon knows that, and I think Gideon knows that the Israeli government never said that. I think what Gideon means is that Israelis, not the Israeli government, said things like that, just like Gideon says what he has. Again, these are all the notes which make up the jazz festival that is Israel. This is the dynamism of the conversation in Israel, but the government never said that. There are no constructions of settlements going on over here. There's no building permits that have been applied for or granted. This was a rather boring bureaucratic adjustment which was done, which we're legally obliged to do under the Oslo agreements. Gideon may want the Israeli government to say something like that, but that's not what it was. When we do construction in the West Bank, we do so because we too have rights.
Gideon, Levy, what do you make of that? Was Israel carrying out its legal obligations under the rights of the Oslo agreement to take this land and ultimately, possibly, to build on it?
Listen, you are now talking about archaeology. Oslo agreements are dead long time ago. Big part of them, most of them, were never implemented, mainly by Israel, but also by the PA, but mainly by Israel. Oslo is dead long time ago. And when you look backwards at the Oslo agreements, you understand that this was maybe one of the biggest traps, because Oslo agreement never meant to put an end to the occupation. And how do I know it? Very simply, because Oslo never talked about evacuating any settlements. And without evacuation of settlements, all the talkings are lip service and empty talkings. They lead to nothing, as we saw in the recent 20 years in which Israel just decreased and Israel tripled almost the number of settlers in the West Bank. This, as I said, has nothing to do with peace or with real, genuine intentions.
Paul Hirschson, we recently talked with Hanan Ashrawi. She's a very respected member of the PLO. We talked about this land acquisition by Israel, and we talked about the conflict in Gaza as well. But about this, she is now expressing, again, serious doubts about a two-state solution. And this is what she said. She said, it clearly represents Israel's deliberate intent to wipe out any Palestinian presence on the land and to willfully impose a de facto one-state solution.
I would say this, you know, the WikiLeaks, the leaking of diplomatic conversations with American diplomats, I think was dangerous and irresponsible, but it was also fascinating. We learned a couple of things. One of which we learned was that what Israel says in public and what Israel says in private is the same thing. And another thing we learned is that that's something that cannot be said about our friends in the Palestinian organizations or in many other places in this neighborhood. Everybody knows, including the Palestinians, and everybody understands and accepts that there are parcels of land within the West Bank which will be incorporated into Israel. I think that it's a rather duplicitous of people to say one thing in private and to reach understandings with us in conversations, and then it's okay not to say that in public, but to say the exact opposite is to undermine the peace process and is to deliberately not prepare your own people for the compromises which both of us are going to be making.
Okay, Gideon, Levy, do you see a two-state solution here? You know, as we reported at the outset, there's something like 500,000 Israelis, Israeli settlers now in the West Bank, and we've just had this latest land acquisition. Do you still see a two-state solution here?
Unfortunately not. I think this train left already the station. I was a great believer of the two-state solution, but the two-state solution is today just a means to gain more time, to waste more time, to pay some kind of lip service to the so-called peace process. But unfortunately, and I emphasize again, unfortunately, this idea is dead, because no Israeli leader will ever evacuate 600,000 settlers, and without their evacuation, there is no two-state solution. And I think we should start to get used to the fact that this opportunity was missed mainly by Israel. And now it's for Israel to suggest any kind of alternative. Okay, no two-state solution. So what do you suggest, Israel or the government of Israel? And that's very interesting to hear. What is the alternative that Israel is planning? Is it an apartheid state? Is it a one-state solution with full equal rights to all its citizens? I'm really curious to know. There are no more alternatives, by the way. It's either an apartheid state or a democracy for all its citizens. There's no third way.
Paul, we just have 40 seconds. You get the last word.
Well, I know I said that I wouldn't criticize Gideon because he's an Israeli citizen and is entitled and encouraged to express his point of view, but I will say, Gideon, that you're wrong. The two-state solution is not dead. You may not want it, but it is going to happen.
Okay,
because it's in our mutual interests.
Gentlemen, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you so much for joining us. Gideon Levy and Paul Hirschson joining us both from Tel Aviv.
Thank you.
We are going to take a break right now. When we come back, a Palestinian perspective. Please stay with us. You're on The Heat.